Welcome, everyone. We're just going to wait a minute or two to let others join us. So thank you for your patience. We'll get started very soon. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're connecting from. We hope that your new year is off to a good start. My name is Xiaojin Lin, Education Consultant at Unicef headquarters in New York City, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the second edition of the FLN Academy. So for those of you who've attended the first Academy last year, we're so happy to see you again. If you're joining the Academy for the first time, we're excited to have you with us. Unicef, in partnership with JPAL, Pratham, and Delivery Associates, have co-organized this academy with the aim of enhancing knowledge of foundational literacy and numeracy, providing access to practical tools and resources, and supporting planning and implementation of FLN efforts. So the particular focus of this second academy will be on deepening the knowledge around practical considerations as you and your country teams are designing, planning, and implementing FLN interventions. In today's session, our partner Delivery Associates will be showcasing a proposed approach to ensure effective implementation of FLN interventions. So as you know, delivering on our objectives for better FLN outcomes for children relies heavily on the how. And what I mean by the how is the process that's in place to put into motion the content or the what. So because no matter how robust our FLN programming, if the implementation is weak, we won't be going very far. And as you'll hear from Delivery Associates, their deliverology approach offers certain principles and tools that can help guide action-oriented problem solving for implementation. So this approach is one of the ways that we can strengthen implementation, and we encourage you to take these principles and tools and adapt and contextualize them as needed. And as you learn about this approach and the tools that are proposed, please think about how they might be applied to your context. How does it fit with what you're currently doing? How can you adapt and modify for your work? So without further ado, please let me hand it over to our partner Delivery Associates. We're so happy to have their team with us today. Over to you, Rahima.
Thank you, Sachin. I'm Rahma Arif from Delivery Associates, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our webinar today. I have just been looking in the chat, and we have people joining us from across the globe, which is very exciting. And I do want to thank you for taking time to be with us here today. And I also hope that you find this session useful for the very important work that all of you are doing for foundational literacy and numeracy for children across the globe. So thank you for your work, and thank you for joining us today. So I want to start just by quickly posing a question to you. You can see it up on your screen now. What do you hope to achieve out of our session today? Just take a minute to pause and reflect and share with us in the chat what you're hoping out of today's session. I think Sachin did a very good setup for us, but I also want to just hear from you what you're hoping to achieve out of attending the session today and spending the next 90 minutes with us. And as you're doing that, I will go ahead and introduce our speakers for today. So we have Richard Page Jones with us. He is a founding member at Delivery Associates, and he has a wealth of experience both in education and in working with governments across the world to deliver reform. We are also joined by Hafsa Iqbal. She is an associate director at Delivery Associates, and she looks after our Middle East and South Asia work. And I'm also online. I'm Rahma, as I've already mentioned. I'm a delivery leader at Delivery Associates, and I'll be leading us through today's session. And I'll also be speaking a bit later on for one section of our webinar. Just a little bit about Delivery Associates to start us off. So Delivery Associates works with governments and multinational organizations across the world. And our focus is on implementation and on helping leaders across the world turn their ambitious reforms into meaningful results for citizens. So using our deliverology framework, which you will hear about from Richard in just a few minutes, we've helped governments across the world deliver outcomes for citizens across education, across health, and various other sectors. And you can see some of those numbers up on your screen right now. I want to talk quickly about the agenda we have for today. So as Sauchin mentioned, the focus of today's session is going to be on implementation or delivery. And as she mentioned, throughout the FLN Academy, we'll be helping you develop a good understanding of the evidence base for FLN reform and what you can do to drive the FLN agenda forward. But for today's session, our focus is going to be on the how. How can you systematically use our tools and processes to make sure that you're able to achieve the results that you want for children across the globe. So this is going to be the focus of today's session. We'll start off by hearing about the deliverology framework, and then we'll go on to focus on two specific elements which are part of the deliverology framework. We'll be talking about planning for delivery, delivery plans, and then we'll also be hearing about data systems for delivery and how those can work to help us in implementation. And before starting off, I also want to mention quickly that on the FLN Hub, you can find resources which are relevant to what we'll be discussing today. And I will speak more about these resources towards the end of the webinar. For now, I'm going to kick us off by handing over to Richard. So thank you for joining us, and over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here with you again. Yours is a great mission, as this quote from Nelson Mandela illustrates. But we also know that it's the right of every child to have a good education. And we also know that it's vitally important to the life chances of children that they get a good start in basic literacy and mathematics. And we also know it's not just good for the individual. We know from OECD evidence that basic numeracy and literacy are fundamentally important to the prosperity of the country as a whole. So it's a real pleasure and a privilege to be joining you again and helping you and supporting you on this great mission. Next slide, please, Rahima. So the question for us then is, what will it take? What will it actually take to implement successfully the FLN education reform and importantly also to achieve the goal that you set yourself, the ambitious goal of increasing the number of children who achieve basic numeracy and literacy by 54 million by 2030. What's it going to take to do that? And we know, next slide please, Rahima, we know from our experience that of over 20 years working on delivery, that it's really important that we have sustained and sustained focus on delivery. Governments often underestimate the importance of implementation, and often unsuccessful reforms have spent a lot of time on policy formation and very little time on implementation. And this has often led to initiatives being thrown out one after another, and teachers and others complaining about too many initiatives. And it's also led to bold initiatives running into the sand through lack of attention to implementation. We really need to shift to where we have a very strong focus on systematically delivering, systematically implementing what it is that we're trying to achieve. Next slide, please, Rahima. So in deliverology, we have a systematic, a sort of scientific approach to reforms that are going to improve citizens' lives. And it helps to deliver these lasting and meaningful results. Deliverology was actually a term that was devised when I was in the Prime Minister's delivery unit by the Permanent Secretary in the Treasury. He used the word in part humorously, but also in part admiration, because through deliverology, we were delivering the outcomes that the money from the Treasury was investing in. So he was very impressed by the approach that we were using. Next slide, please, Rahima. So to support delivery, we need both the strong foundations and high quality executions. And we're going to talk about two of these things in detail in the rest of this session. Strong foundations need plans, good enough plans, to actually chart the way forward. And these plans, as Rahima is going to illustrate, have got three key elements. They need really good, clear, evidence-based actions that we are confident are going to drive the improvements that we're seeking in the outcomes for children. They need delivery chains. The delivery chains are the maps, the sets of people who are concerned in getting from the strategy and the ambitions that we have here in Unicef to actually changing the way teachers teach and the experience of children out there in all of their countries. Who are the key players who are linked together in this delivery chains, and what contributions do they make? And in this project, you have complicated delivery chains. You have a lot of different people who are contributing, who are bringing advice, who are bringing finance to the countries, and getting them aligned and ensuring that all of their contributions are properly aligned and all work together to deliver the outcomes we're seeking is vitally important. And it's your contributions, it's the contributions of people who inspect, people who develop testing regimes, people who deliver the training. It's getting all of this aligned and pulling in the same direction. And thirdly, it's about getting trajectories. 2030 is a long way off, and we need some interim milestones, some interim targets that will tell us whether we're on track to achieve the goals that we set ourselves. Of course, it needs governance and accountability in our delivery plans so people are clear who's doing what and who's accountable for what. And it needs some good tools to support and guidance to how we work. And fundamentally, it's about building commitment and focus to keep people focused on the things that really matter, to keep the morale and the energy of people in the system up, so that everyone is pulling together and working towards the same goals. So we need to get this commitment, we need the plans, and we need the accountability, and then we need to execute it well. And for this, we need strong data. We need good data at individual pupil level. We need good data at school level. We need data at district level and at national level to ensure that we have a really clear view, everyone in the system have a clear view about what pupil achievement is looking like and how we're moving towards improving it. And then vitally importantly, we need to really understand what is happening on the ground. We have our plans, we have people in offices, we have people in central units. It's really important that we understand what this is landing like on the ground and what principals, what teachers are making of it, and what sort of barriers there are on the ground to implementing this. And we need to learn fast and bring messages back and make real-time changes to the delivery that we're making. We need to set routines. We need to set clear points in time where we sit down together, we look at what the data looks like, and we resolve any problems that are emerging in delivery. And finally, and importantly, we need to communicate. We need to keep communicating the messages about why this is important, what the moral imperative of this is, and also to communicate what we expect from different people in the system. We need to communicate outwards, but we also need to listen. We need to bring the messages back about how well it's going, what the barriers are, what more needs to be done. So those are the two elements that we're going to focus on today. We're going to focus on the plans, and we're going to focus on the data, on how we get data, good data at different levels in what are quite challenging circumstances in some of the countries that are joining us here together today. Next slide, please, Rahima. And as well as having tools and as well as having the approaches that we talked about, alongside that needs to go a mindset and a culture. And that sort of culture that we've been seeking to build in Delivery Associates with people we've worked with has got 5 key elements. We need to really be ambitious, that we can achieve the 54 million, that we can make big changes, and we need to get it done as well as possible. We need to keep focusing on our priorities and also on the actions that are having maximum impact on that and not get distracted. Of course, this is difficult. Many of the countries represented here today face some really tough challenges in terms of maybe political unrest, maybe conflict in their countries. So keeping the focus on the education and achievement of children is difficult but vital. We need clarity about what we're trying to achieve, what's expected from people, and also understanding what's really happening out there on the ground. We need to continue to bring urgency and avoid complacency. Yes, we need to bring messages back about success, and that's really important to build momentum, to build confidence in the system. But we must never become complacent. The road through to 2030 is going to be difficult, and we need to continue to work hard and together to achieve what's needed to be achieved. And finally, we need this to be irreversible. We need to build the capacity and put in place things that are going to stay for a long time in our systems. And it's interesting, as well as being a member of DA, I'm also chair of governance of our local primary school here in England, in London. And 20 years ago, we set up the National Literacy Strategy. And when I go into classrooms in our school this week, I will see children still benefiting from that strategy. There's still a literacy hour taught to a framework with a 3-part lesson. It's very exciting, very engaging, using phonics in the right sort of way. The fundamental elements of the literacy strategy are still in place. Children have benefited over those 20 years, standards have improved, and they will continue to do so. And I've seen that in other countries across the world, in Africa, I've seen it in Australia, where the benefits from really building confidence and capability in the system has led to sustained results. Next slide, please, Rahima. And this is a complex slide. I'm not going to talk in detail about it, but our approach to delivery and some of the things I've been talking about so far, we built into a 15-element framework with 5 key pillars in it. How you develop your foundation, how you understand what the challenges are, how you plan for delivery, and that's going to be one of our key elements today, how you drive delivery through routines and problem solving, and then how you create the culture and the capacity for irreversible change. So those 15 elements we use to structure our support that we provide through the work that we engage with. So that will be there and that will be used. I just finally want to say that the road ahead will be difficult. This is an ambitious and challenging project. It's challenging, it's complicated, and all sorts of things could come between now and 2030 that could blow us off track, like the pandemic, like conflict, like political unrest. But I'm confident that the tools and the approaches and my wonderful colleagues who are going to be working with you in more detail will really help to deliver your goal and to make sure that all the hard work you've done in terms of the planning that you've done, in terms of the partners you brought together, will actually help to ensure that that delivers the very ambitious and very important outcomes that you've set yourself. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much. I wish you well. I'll be joining you for the rest of the day, and I'll be around for more questions and comments later on in the session. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Richard. And we actually do have some time right now. So if you have any questions for Richard, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A box. I'll pause for you to reflect and share any questions. So while we're waiting for questions, Richard, I suppose one thing I can ask you to speak on a bit is how deliverology is different from project management. I think that's a question that often comes up when we talk about our frameworks. So could you speak to that, please?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and one I have been asked before, actually, and I think a couple of differences I'd highlight. I think first and foremost, deliverology focuses on outcomes for children. I think by and large, project management tends to focus on outputs. This is all about changing the experience of our children and the education that they receive. Overall delivery plan. The other thing I think that's fundamentally different is deliverology involves changing people's behavior. If we want to get children to learn more, we've got to get teachers to teach better. We've got to change the way in which people act and behave. And that's difficult, and it really needs the use of influence, persuasion, a various other set of levers, which makes it rather different to project management, where you are producing a building or producing a set of specific outputs. So I think the ability to influence and persuade and motivate is a key part of deliverology. It is all in all, it's about human beings working together to change outcomes for children, and that makes it somewhat different from a project plan in that way.
Thanks, Richard. So please do continue to share any questions in the Q&A or chat. I also noticed somebody had put their hand up. If you want to put your hand up, I can add you to the speakers and you can share your question with Richard. Is there somebody who wants to ask a question and I can unmute your microphone? I saw a hand up earlier.
Rahima and Richard, while we wait for people to raise their hands if they would like, there's a question in the chat around how do we mobilize the authorities or kind of like the stakeholders? How do we mobilize them and influence them to be interested interested for the results of the outcomes that we're trying to achieve?
I think one of the key things is to constantly reinforce the key messages about why this is important, and those key messages about the importance of children achieving good numeracy and literacy. So vital. It's so vital to their life chances. It's so vital to the country as a whole, to its economy, to its prosperity. So I think constantly reinforcing the messages about why this is important and what the benefits are for the individuals concerned, for the agencies concerned, for the countries concerned, for the industries concerned, how important it is that children do gain really good basic levels of numeracy and literacy. I think that's a really important part of this. And also, I think constantly praising and motivating people who are part of this, and constantly feeding back messages about the successes, the improvements, and the benefits that has led to the children and to families and to the country as a whole.
Thanks, Richard. And we have time for one final question, which has come to us from the chat. So this is a question from Mickey Edwards, and he's asked that, Richard, you've spoken about culture and mindset. Does that not take some time, or implementation must be accompanied by real-time motivation?
So I didn't quite catch the question. Can you say that again, Rahima?
Sorry, I'll repeat that. So this is a question about culture and mindset, and our participants want to know, isn't this something that takes quite a bit of time to change? and how can we make sure that we're doing it in the same time frame that we have for our implementation?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It does take time to change. And I guess our take is that it's vital for us as an organization, but also trying to embed it in the organizations through engagement, through the actions that are taken, as well as having a sort of as well as having it down on paper, as well as saying this is their culture, this is what we're going to do, actually acting it out through all the engagements that we have, and demonstrating, walking the talk on culture is both vital and a good way, I think, of transmitting it to the people that we work with, to the people that we engage with, demonstrating this is the way we work, this is the way that delivery happens. I think that's very important.
Thanks, Richard, and thanks to everybody for your questions. We're going to move on, but please do continue to put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll have time throughout today's webinar to come back to those questions. So do please continue to reflect and share any questions you have for Richard or for the rest of the speakers. So I'm going to move us on to the next section, which is on delivery planning. And I do realize that when we talk about planning, or when we say plans, it's a word we've heard a lot of in the work that we do, and it's not a very exciting word. It's a very ordinary word, and it's something which many of us find to be sort of the most obvious first step when we talk about implementation. But today we want to focus on delivery plans, and I want to share with you how these plans are different from traditional plans that you may have come across in your work. And I saw earlier somebody had put in the chat that very same as one of the objectives that they hope to achieve out of today's session. So I hope that by the end of this section, you will have a new perspective on plans as not just documents or reports that you work on at the beginning of your project before going into the field, but as an ongoing process that can help you across all of the stages of implementation from start to finish. Before I speak about that, I do want to hear from all of you. What, in your opinion, makes the plan good? And for this, we're going to use Menti and generate a word cloud from your responses. So the way to use Menti, all you have to do is go to menti.com, and then you can input the code that you see at the top of your screen. I'll read that out quickly. It's 8164-2327, and my colleagues will also put the link to this in the chat box for you. So please go to Menti, have a think about what makes a plan good, and you can input your response. And I'll just share sort of the word cloud and see what everybody has responded. So do take a minute to do that. I'll pause to give you time. So I see some responses on, so I see the word specific in there. I see realistic. I see organization, practical, succinct, achievable. And so I realistic is the one that's really standing out. So a lot of people have added that in. Measurable, detailed. So thank you for that. And the one that's standing out the most, that's right in the middle, as you can see, which means that's been the response for a lot of our participants, is realistic. And actually, I think that's a very good word, which sums up what we're trying to do with plans. So thank you for sharing. I'm going to go back to our presentation now. So I want to start by talking about sort of the different kinds of plans that we may have seen, we may have come across in our work. So as we go around the world, we see all different types of plans, and you can see we've put up some examples on the screen. So most often, I think what we find is a combination of 1, 2, and 3. So these are plans usually which have people have spent hours and hours on writing and developing. They can be very well written. They can be articulate. Usually, we might find that there is a lot of description of the complexities of the problem or the intricacies of the problem that we have at hand. There might also be some data and statistics in there. And there can also be, usually we find assertions about what works and what doesn't work. But even with all of this, these plans end up sitting on a shelf. And that's because there isn't a pivot to action in these plans. So that's essentially what we're trying to do with plans. We don't want a very good description of the problem. We don't want to know what works and what doesn't. Those are important things, but the real purpose of the plan is to pivot us to action, to tell us how we can achieve what we're setting out to achieve. So if you look at number 4, that's a good place to be. So if your plan looks like number 4, that's a very good starting point. So if you have a sense of the actions and the activities that are required to help you achieve your goal. If your plan is living, it doesn't sit on a shelf, it gets used, it gets updated as you learn new things. If it has data and trajectories, a very clear sense of where you are today, where you need to get in the future, and what are the pathways that are going to help you to get there, and a clear sense of roles and responsibilities, who is going to do what to help you get to your target and your goal. So that's a very good starting point. But what we need to do some additional work to make this kind of plan into a delivery plan. And that's what I want to share with you next. You can see now I've put up, these are sort of the 3 elements which make delivery plans unique, and they make delivery plans different from some of the other plans that you may have seen in your work. So the first of those is a prioritized reform strategy. So a reform strategy is simply the set of activities that you need to undertake to help you achieve your goal. And these are grounded in sort of good policy making and a good evidence base of what works and what doesn't work. But the thing I really want to focus on here is this idea of a prioritized reform strategy. And that means we need to choose from sort of the whole array of actions and activities that are available to us to really drill down and focus on the few that are going to help us drive the maximum impact. And even taking a step back, this is to say, it's very easy to get overwhelmed and bogged down by all of the different problems we have in education in the different sectors that we work with. And this is not to say that those are not important, but the key to successful implementation is to focus on just the top priorities and make sure that we're working to deliver those in sort of a timely, ambitious fashion. And this is also a recognition of the fact that we have limited resources in terms of time, in terms of people, in terms of cash. So a prioritized reform strategy, I think, is one of the first things I would say make delivery plans different from regular plans. What is one of the first things you need to do when you set out to plan for implementation, a prioritized reform strategy. The second thing I want to talk about, which you can see on your screens, is delivery chains. So delivery chains include the set of actors, starting from the leaders of reforms, all the way down to the citizens who the reform is intended to benefit. So in our particular case, this would be starting from the education ministries, the governments who are working in education, and working right down to the schools, to the principals, to the teachers, and to the students. So working systematically through who are all of the actors in this chain, and what do they need to do? How do we need them to change their behavior to help us get to where we want to get to and to help us get the change that we want? And this means asking all of those questions around how many people are there? What are their incentives? How do they work together? Do they interact with each other? What are their data flows? Do they have the capacity to do what we're asking them to do? Are they going to understand what we're trying to achieve? Do they have the right incentives in place? So mapping a delivery chain is an exercise which helps us answer all of those questions. And it's when we map that out actively and really try to understand the system that's when we can recognize if there are any unseen choke points in the theory of change that we've articulated for ourselves in our reform. So as an example, mapping a delivery chain is going to help you get from just saying, we're going to introduce a new curriculum and we're going to train teachers on a curriculum to improve the learning outcomes. You're going to go from just that statement to thinking about how many teachers do we have in the system? Who is going to train them? How many of the teachers are we going to train? What sort of support systems are we going to put in place in addition to the training? How are we going to know that the training is having an effect? So those are all of the questions which mapping a delivery chain is going to help you to answer. And this is a very useful exercise which adds a lot of value to your plans, and it helps you anticipate any capacity gaps, any choke points, any constraints that you may have once you go into implementation. The third thing which you see on here is targets and trajectories. So targets are a bit more straightforward. A target is a numerical commitment for your goal, which is time bound. So for example, saying we want to achieve a 10% increase in student scores for end of year exams by June of 2023. That's a target. Trajectories, however, is the piece that plans often miss out on. And what a trajectory is doing, a trajectory is telling you when you can expect to see the change that you want, and also what is that change going to look like on the ground. And so in our case, what is that change going to look like in schools? So a trajectory is going to help you think through what are the activities that you're doing, what results are you going to get from those activities at various points in time, and how are those results going to stack up over time to get you to your final target in the time that you have specified. So as an example, if you're rolling out a new curriculum for schools, a trajectory is going to help you do the thinking around how many schools are going to have this new curriculum in 6 months, how many are going to have it in 12 months, how many in 18 months. And this is not a stick to beat ourselves up with. This is crucial just to help us plan and anticipate what we want to do. And so once we're actually in the implementation phase, it helps us to react quickly and see if things are not going the way we've anticipated them going. So if we're not meeting our trajectories, this is the chance for us to reflect and think about, do we need to change our approach? Do we need to speed up? Do we need to ask for more resources? And those are the questions which trajectories can help you answer once you're in the actual implementation phase. During the planning, doing this work upfront, thinking about trajectories upfront and mapping them out, this is the work which adds real value to plans and turns your plan into a delivery plan. So you can see all of these elements working together, linking through to each other, a prioritized reform strategy, very clear roles and responsibilities for all of the different actors in our delivery chain, targets and trajectories, linking through to those. These three elements working together make up a delivery plan. And I'm going to go ahead and share another very key element of delivery plans, and that's that delivery plans are iterative and they are adaptive. And this means that we acknowledge upfront that we can't be 100% confident that everything that we've planned is going to pan out exactly as we have it in our heads. We can't be sure that we've foreseen any potential roadblocks or capacity constraints. But we do have the confidence to say, we have a well thought out plan, let's go to the ground. And knowing that we have enough feedback loops, we have enough data, and we have enough relationships in the system, that we'll be able to feed back into our plan and learn quickly what's working and what's not working. And that's essentially sort of the loop that you can see on the screen now. This is what it's saying. That you're not aiming for perfection. You're not aiming for sort of an unattainable plan, which is perfect in every respect. What you're doing is you're starting fast. You're starting with a good enough plan, and then you're learning fast. You're learning from the ground. You're using your feedback loops. You're using your data to learn what works and what doesn't work. And then you're feeding them back into your plan. And as such, you can see that delivery plans and delivery planning is an ongoing process. It's something that's happening simultaneously while you're also problem solving. You keep going back to the drawing board as you get new information, as you get new data. So it's not a linear process, and that's why you can see that loop on the screen. It's telling you this is an ongoing process. It's circular. You're constantly doing planning as you're doing implementation as well. So once you think through the things I've shared, so I've talked about prioritization, I've talked about delivery chains, I've talked about targets and trajectories, and I've talked about an adaptive and flexible approach. So when you think about all these things, it does become a bit clear how delivery plans differ from ordinary plans. And just to sort of reinforce that, you can see the comparison that we have up on the screens now. Our delivery plans are focusing on immediate top priorities. They're not trying to fix the entire problems that we have in a system. They're guiding you to action to address the biggest problems. They're not just explaining the problem to you. And they're very much focused on accelerating implementation, on helping you through each stage of your implementation, and on driving impact. And another thing I want to mention here is when we're doing delivery plans, we also want to be innovative. We want to think about new approaches to solve problems and new approaches to resolve the implementation roadblocks that we hadn't foreseen. And so later on in today's section, when we speak about data systems, you'll see some very innovative use of digital tools that was crucial to a reform effort, that was crucial to the delivery planning of that effort. So I have here sort of a quick checklist for you on sort of the 8 questions which can help you, which a good delivery plan must answer. And I've already spoken to sort of the top 5. Your plan articulates your vision, it lays out your goal, it lays out your target, it lays out all of the different activities that you need to do. It also assigns a leader to each of those activities. That's another really sort of crucial thing to keep in mind. Every reform activity must have a leader, an owner who's driving the effort, who's motivating and inspiring everybody, who's sort of spearheading and working with everybody. There's a point in there about delivery chains, which we've already discussed as well. Trajectories, which I've mentioned, are really important. And I also want to speak about communication and the role of communication. So during the delivery planning process and in the delivery plan, one of the things we want to do upfront is to think about who are the different stakeholders who we need to work with to make this reform happen. And there has to be both shared understanding right from the outset of the work that needs to be done and of the work that we're planning. There also has to be a plan on how we're going to engage these stakeholders going forward and as we move forward in our implementation. We also have to be really clear about the resources and the support that is required. Another bit that is very useful to deliberate on upfront so that we can move around our resources, we can make sure we have the right people, we can make sure we have enough money to do the kind of investments that we're planning. That's also another important step to keep in mind when you're delivery planning. And finally, there's a point in there about anticipating and preparing for risks. I think this is one which we often do. But there is some value while delivery planning to think about what are the biggest risks and pitfalls in your plan, and if we have any mitigation strategies upfront on how we're going to tackle those. So I've spoken a lot about delivery plans, and at this point, you might be wondering what a delivery plan looks like. So actually, there isn't a fixed format for a delivery plan, and the format of a plan is not the most important thing that we're after. The most important thing is that it gets used and it's useful to you throughout your implementation work. I mean, having said that, I'm still putting up an example for you, and this is the template of a good delivery plan, because you can see it's laying out the actions, it's laying out the owners for those actions, it's laying out timelines, and also another thing which you can see on here right at the end, the little colored boxes, these are sort of traffic lights, and they're helping you monitor the status of different actions. So where you can see a red little box that's telling you this action is in trouble, we're getting delayed, this needs attention. Where it's green, it's telling you we're on track to deliver what we've promised, we're on track for this action. So you can see from this template This is not something which needs to sit on a shelf. This is something which you use throughout your implementation, and something that you keep coming back to and you keep updating. There we go. So I'm going to pause there. Before we take your questions on this, there is a very quick poll for you. And again, we're going to use Menti for this. So you can see the Menti code at the top. My colleagues are going to put the link in the chat box for you as well. And so have a think about all of the 8 different elements of good delivery plans that I've discussed. You can see them on the screen as well. And I want you to sort of rank them from the ones you've seen most often in the plans you've come across, and the ones which you've seen the least often. So take a minute to do that, and I'll switch over to show you, to share the responses that we get on Menti. So the link is in the chat now. And I'll just put the Menti up to share your responses as well. So activities to be undertaken, I think that's the most obvious one. And we see that at the top. It's the one people have come across most often in the plans that they've done. And towards the end, we have strategies for communication. So that's an often ignored piece, but a very important piece. And when Richard spoke earlier about sort of culture and mindset, that's not just for sort of the people who were developing the reform for, that's also very much for the top leadership who are spearheading the reform, all of the stakeholders that we need to be on board with us. And that's where the strategies for communication come in. So it's a very important piece, which should not be underestimated. So that's a very telling ranking, and thank you all for sharing. I think we can see that the most intuitive ones are the ones on top, and the ones that we're missing out on are at the bottom. And I just want to reflect on that by saying that implementation is not always intuitive. It needs as much sort of consideration and deliberation as sort of policy making. So that's the thing to keep in mind. We do have just a couple of minutes, so if there are any questions, please put them in the chat. So while we're waiting for questions, Richard, I'll ask you to come in and sort of share any reflections you have with us on the process of delivery planning and what that process looks like and how we can make it more efficient.
Thank you very much, and thanks for that excellent presentation and really interesting exercise. And 2 observations, I suppose. One is, I think there is a need to, it's clear that a lot of work has gone into strategy, a lot of work has gone into planning. I've seen the pillars that you have, seen the emphasis that's been given to leadership, which is really important. Principals, head teachers out there in schools are absolutely key to delivering that, but also the use of parents as well as co-providers of education is also really important. So that's been good. I think more thought about the delivery chain would be helpful, and given the complexity, the number of partners, the link between funders and other agencies and the government in the actual country, and how they ensure they work together and focus on the priorities together, that's really, really important. The other thing I'd say about communication, it's really important, I think, to get champions out there in the field, principals of schools speaking positively about the strategy and about the outcomes it's seeking to achieve. People are a bit skeptical sometimes when they listen to governments and people in government or people in the centre. They're much more easily persuaded by their colleagues and their peers out there. So getting champions who convey very positive messages about the intent and what's actually going on, I think is really important in terms of a communication strategy too.
Thanks, Richard. And there's actually a question in the chat, which I'll put to you. This is somebody who said, I have seen a good plan doing miserably while implementation. How can we avoid that?
Well, two comments, I guess. Was it really a good plan if it got in the way of being implemented? So perhaps I should have been more in there about the things that we've been discussing now. But also, I think it also speaks to the fact it has to be implemented by people. And that's why the culture is so important, and that's why the mindset is so important. These plans don't implement themselves, they're implemented by people, and you have to have a motivated workforce who are striving hard, are all pulling in the right direction, who see the moral cause of this and are motivated to implement it well. So I think that's the other point I'd make.
Thanks so much, Richard. So please do continue to share your questions and reflections, and we'll come back to those later. But for now, we're going to move on to the next section of our presentation on data systems, and I'll hand over to Hafsa for that.
Great, thank you, Rahima, and hello, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here. I have really enjoyed seeing your questions and the word clouds coming up. I'm going to be taking us through the next section on what makes data systems strong, and especially when you're trying to deliver in difficult contexts. So with that, we will get started, and we will do that by hearing from you first on what have you experienced, because we want to ground this session in your reality as much as possible. So let's head back to Menti for a bit and hear from you. What are some strengths that you feel exist in your data systems at the moment? And then we'll do one on the opportunities. So I think my colleagues will put the link again, and this time the code will be 80707217, please. Just give you a moment while you're heading over and filling out the strengths, and then we'll reflect on screen. The link is in chat along with the code in English and other languages. All right, we've got one person in. A couple more people coming into Menti. Just let a few people come in before we start seeing some patterns. Got 6-7 people answering now. A lot of people so far are sharing that it's about planning and how good data can help you inform your planning, whether that's forward planning or informing your current planning. Some people are also in a similar vein reflecting on how that can help with your policy making. And then on the margins, you'll see People are talking about how it also leads to better decision making, whether that's for assessments or other reasons, could be for targets or problem solving or reflection. And then somebody said triangulation, which is really good because that's one of the most important things good data systems will let you do. Advocacies. That seems to be on people's mind as well, since data that's right could help you create transparency around the progress that you're making and could help with advocacy and garner support from leadership, which is great. These are all great things, and I'm glad that's helping you in your data systems. So then you've got this other question coming up now on your Menti screen. What are some opportunities for improvement right now in your systems and in how you use your data? What are some areas you think, gosh, I hope or I wish I could use my data for that? The code for Menti is the same, and I believe my colleague has moved you on to the next question. You could also just go to menti.com and use the code 80707217, and you'll see the next question appear. There we go, got one person in. So wanting clean data or digital data that you could regularly update. Regularity and real-time data is something people wish they had. Decision-making. One person has said they can't focus on problems at the moment. A lot of stuff coming around enumeration, cleaning of data, and how to then use it, and then constantly update it. So management of data, and then real-time analysis, and then using that for that big word in the middle, decision making, which is all great to see. This has been great. I think a lot of the presentation that's coming now after this is going to focus on a lot of these aspects of how you get good data, reliable data, how you get that to work and use and constantly update. So I'm really glad that might feel relevant. The main presentation now. Sorry, I think my Zoom quit. I got lost for a bit. All right, I'm back now. Great. So any strong effort begins always by asking the why. Why do we need data in this case? Why is it important for us? And so that's what we will begin with today as well. So data might help you first to track progress, as you see on that bottom left corner of the slide. But if you want to track progress, you also probably need to understand progress against what, in which case you will need to define a vision of where you want to get to and then understand performance against it regularly. So those three circles are almost linked. And then as you track progress, you might find yourselves that you're not on track. And in that instance, data can be useful in identifying and solving problems you're facing, which in turn will help you to hold yourselves and other leaders to account for what's working and what's not. And as you strive to improve, it's highly likely you'll reach success. And that's when you might want to use data again to document and then share almost world-leading stories of impact and get to that advocacy piece that we were talking about in the word cloud. These are all compelling reasons for using data. This is not an exhaustive list, of course. So you might have other reasons as well. But for all those reasons, we think it's really important to focus on data. And so in the next few slides, we're going to lay out what we've learned in this area. We see data as is often used for four main roles in most systems. The first one is around getting focused. Data can really help you understand of all the problems, which are the ones that are the biggest and will help you get to impact fastest. And that helps you use your resources, which are often limited, in the best way possible as well. Second, it also helps you adapt. So as you begin, you always learn from implementation, and often that might mean that your goal remains the same, but the path to get there can change. So for example, let's say you're trying to improve qualitative learning as part of the system that you're in, and you think, let's revise, you've agreed to revise the textbooks. But are the textbooks actually being used in the classroom? You may want to double down on the data and understand whether utilization is there or not. And if it's not, you might find through data, let's say, for example, that teachers are finding it really heavy to use them. In this case, you may want to plan to adapt again and support teachers with additional tools like lesson planning. Alternatively, you might learn that your assessment is not linked to the new textbooks and teachers are teaching to the test, in which case you might want to think about how to make your assessments linked to textbooks, but you wouldn't find any of this if you didn't look at data. So adapting is one area where data is really key and goes back to the points Rahima was making earlier about living in adaptive plans. Thirdly, data may also help you with improving your management of the system. So sometimes it helps you identify high performers, and you might want to collect additional data there on what's working over there, and then use that to spread best practices to those areas or schools where it's not so good at the moment. And then lastly, data might also be useful in generating world-leading impact stories and quantifying the impact on the ground so that you can get more support, as I was mentioning earlier. All of those are important roles, but what does data need to look like for you to be able to do that? We'll see that on the next slide, where any good data system, for it to be able to play the roles I was just speaking about, it needs to be circular and fast. That means on a day-to-day basis, data needs to flow in on the right metrics, and it needs to be able to help you take decisions. And then those decisions need to flow back out as targeted actions. And so that means you'll be able to use your data efficiently and then track how things are moving. I know this might feel a bit theoretical, so what we're going to do next is just look at what good and circular data looks like in practice, and we're going to hear a story from Punjab, where I'd say data reforms were quite successful. And so in the next few slides, we're going to talk you through that story. If you'll see on the next slide that this is how we kind of set up the data system. And I'd say fundamental to making the Pakistan education reform successful was its data system. It would not be an exaggeration to say this was actually the linchpin of the entire roadmap. When we first started, I remember we didn't have much, but by the end, the agency that was responsible for housing most of this data was almost outstanding and well-oiled and very reliable. And it was collecting data regularly on key indicators from all 60,000 government schools in Punjab every single month. And how did it do that? It did so by recruiting almost 900 ex-army men who were given a list of schools that they were supposed to visit each week on a motorbike. And to minimize the risk of corruption, they never visited the same school twice within a 6-month period. So once the data was collected and when they visited those schools, we then accelerated the analysis that came back so that by the middle of, let's say, the next month, the previous month's data was already analyzed, and the analysis set out sharp decisions that needed to be taken. The analysis started out very basic, but quickly it grew quite sophisticated with each cycle of analysis. And I remember by the end, the system was automatically generating very rapidly for each district in Punjab a monthly data pack, showing how each district compared to every other district in Punjab. And so along that delivery chain that you see in the middle of the slide, data started flowing all the way up to the chief minister. And then At the province level, the chief minister would track very regularly through heat maps in what became quite a quick and easy way for him to understand which districts were on track and which were not. Where districts were falling back, a request for support or his decisions was raised, and then that was sent back out to schools through the district education departments, and improvements were then retracked again when the next month data packs were made and sent out. And so this type of circular feedback loop at that fast pace of almost a month made the whole thing quite amazing. And I think the thing that really helped was the simplicity and clarity with which these data packs were presented while maintaining analytical rigor. So simplicity doesn't mean that we weren't rigorous or looking at the right indicators. I'm going to walk you through the visuals in the next few slides to show you what this actually looks like and what the monthly data packs contained. So this next one that you see is at the frontline level with schools. Each school would have a scorecard, which would typically look like this. It started out much simpler, but towards the end, it was all of these indicators. And these would be looked at monthly. As you can see on the screen, there would be a set of indicators. Each would have a target and baseline that would be compared at school level. And then just to be able to keep a pulse on the trend, it also tracked whether this was better than or worse than the last time it was reviewed. So that would happen at every school level. And then from the schools, it would then go to the district management. So then what happened next is the district management would collect all of this, and then we would start to assess at each district level how each district is doing. So that's what you'll see on the next slide, where data from all schools would be aggregated, and it allowed us to keep on top of all 36 districts in Punjab at the same time. It was a huge system with 60,000 schools, and so this just simply and very easily helped us stay on top of all of that. And presenting it in this beautiful little heat map made it very simple for leaders, because their goal became, how do we make each district green? And it also helped hone in management time, because the areas that deserved most attention were the ones that were red. Everybody became familiar with that, and then over the course of a year, as you can see, we were able to get all schools and all districts up to 90% on literacy and numeracy formative assessments. So that's what happened at district level. And then you'll see on the next slide that all of this data then aggregated at province level. Sometimes performance would drop, but our goal was to make sure it stayed at the target of 82% overall across subjects. And every time it dropped, we would just go back to check which districts fell, and then within those districts, which schools fell, by looking at the school scorecard that I showed you earlier. So because we had tracked everything from school to district to province, it helped us dissect or course correct every time numbers fell really helpfully. And so those are a few examples of how it looked. My last point on some of this is that setting up good data system is good, but as you'll see on the next slide, data is only as good as what it's used for. Using data well and regularly was another key element that made these reforms successful. So throughout the province, starting from the school to the Chief Minister's office, we instituted monthly and quarterly checkpoints, or as we say, routines, where key leaders would meet across the delivery chain. They would review the data packs, take stock, and take decisions based on what they could take decisions on, and then the remaining issues would get elevated to the next level, and then the monthly data pack was shown at the next level, and that would help trickle down decisions back, and created a circular feedback loop every single month. So these routines were quite effective and essential for driving some of those elements in the data system. I will now conclude this bit of presentation on data systems on the next slide by summarizing that there are overall 6 characteristics that make data systems effective at a system level when you're really trying to roll out large-scale education reforms. 1, it needs to be fast, so we did it at a monthly pace. 2, it needs to be detailed, as I was mentioning. So you do that at the school level, but then you also do it at district and then province, so that you're able to go granularly down to the detail that you need to, and come back up and zoom out as needed. Thirdly, it needs to be accurate. You don't want people to invalidate your efforts by calling into question the reliability of the data. So one thing we really did was also do a lot of regular spot checks, audits, etc., to make sure that data was triangulated and everything we were getting was reliable and valid and accurate. Fourthly, it needs to be clear. So for leaders to take decisions, leaders often don't have time, and just presenting all of this complex data from 60,000 schools in just a single heat map, which told you where to focus your attention, which was the red bits, it made it very easy for leaders to take decisions where they needed to, which also fast-tracked decision-making processes and therefore then what got done in schools. Five, it needs to be useful. So only the metrics that really mattered and affected performance meaningfully were tracked. We didn't track the other things. And lastly, transparency, or being transparent. Those who are at the front line should have access to data so that they can support the leaders in improving it. Otherwise, it can feel like we're not empowering people who lead the efforts and undermining their ability to lead reforms at the front line. As Richard also said earlier, it's the people who deliver the programs and mindsets and culture, and so important, and transparency plays a big role there as well. And so just to show what this looks like in practice, in summary, you'll see on the next slide that these 6 characteristics, they translated in these ways in Punjab. So firstly, to be fast, we did the reports monthly. Initially, this was ex-army men going out on motorbikes to schools, and later it was on tablets, so that data would get synced from the GPS connection and internet directly to provincial systems. This was much later, but in the earlier days, just to be fast, it used to be on a CD at the time, and it would go to the district office, and somebody would manually enter it and send it back to the province. So it really depends on the situation. Second, it needs to be detailed, so we could go directly to the school level and see and understand what was going wrong at that level. Thirdly, it needs to be accurate, so we had a lot of checks as mentioned here. And fourthly, the leaders should find them simple and easy to use. So the Chief Minister of Punjab in particular really liked the heat maps and claimed that they were his favorite, and they were hence really driving real improvements. And then fifth and sixth, lastly, they need to be publicly accessible and published daily. So in Punjab, we used to publish them daily on a website at the agency. So with that, I will conclude this bit on data systems, and would love to kind of hear your questions. I can see some have been coming up in the chat as well. Before we kind of address those, we'll just head back to Menti again. This time, our question to you is, which of these things feel important to you in your data systems? How are you using them, and which are important? So we've got a few options here, and we ask you to kind of just help rank up for us in terms of how you're using data and what you're finding important. So to do that, just head to menti.com like always and use the code 9282862821. And Xiaochen has very kindly pasted the link as well in chat. Just give you a moment to head there and think about your ranking. And then we'll share on screen. All right, so we've got a few answers by now. A lot of people say that they find data useful in identifying problems. and then tracking performance. Fewer people are saying that they're using data to identify trends or establishing accountability. And then we've got a few people at the bottom who, after that, look at data to share with stakeholders or anchor discussions. Tracking performance and identifying problems is coming up strong. And that makes sense, right? Because if you can identify problems and solve them is the more important bit, and then track performance to see if you're moving towards your target or not, that's automatically almost going to help you do the other things. You will be able to anchor your discussion in meetings because you would have identified the problems. You would be able to identify your trends, and you would be able to establish accountability because you're so clear about the problems and able to track performance. So all of this sounds right. Thank you very much for filling this out. We do have a few minutes for question and answers, if there's anything. I see some questions have already been answered in chat. Rahima, is there anything we should focus on at the moment? I haven't been monitoring the Q&A.
So I'm keeping an eye on the chat and Q&A. So please feel free to put in any questions that you have around this section of the presentation or sort of anything you've heard over the past hour. But just sort of, I'll go to Richard to get a quick reflection from him. So what Hafsa's described here in the system in Punjab, it's quite a complex data system. And we do come across sort of countries or systems where that investment or that infrastructure is not in place. So, I mean, perhaps you could share some advice for them. And I know this is not a very straightforward question, but I think we'd all be interested in hearing what you have to say about this. Oh, Richard, are you with us?
Yes, sorry, Rahima, you want me to comment at this stage?
Yes, please.
First of all, I'd like to thank Hafsa. Amazing story about what happened in the Punjab and how data was used in a really, really powerful way. That's an incredible story. And I think a real story about using appropriate technology to do the job that needed doing. So thanks very much for that. I guess one observation from me is I think it's really important that the data that's used was used by the minister, was used by the central team, but also has to be used by the school itself. If we're asking them for this data, they need to be using this data themselves in order that they can drive improvement within their own school. Feeding the information back to families and to children to say what they need to do to improve, and for the institution to look at the head to look at this themselves and to use it also. Because if we're just asking people to provide data, it can cause resentment, accusations of bureaucracy. But if we say to them, this data is, we need it, but also it's great for you. You need it yourself to improve your own performance, to provide a better deal for your teachers, for your children, for your families. So I think that's an important part of it. The other observation I make, I think, is I think there is a quite challenge still in getting good, reliable data on children's achievement, and actually, getting really good data about their mastery, the assessment we use, how we assess their mastery. And whilst we can get fast monthly data on many things, that's more challenging, I think. And quite a thought, I think we'll have to go into what sort of testing or assessment regime you put in place and how you ensure that that is reliable and strong, that measure of mastery of foundation numeracy and literacy. So that's quite a challenge still, I think, and quite a lot of people need to think hard about that.
Thanks, Richard. So there's some questions for you, Hafsa, in the chat about if you could speak a bit about how this data was shared back with schools and how it was communicated to schools, how the feedback was given to the schools.
Yeah, it's a great question. So every month there were monthly data packs and they would get reviewed by the district leadership who will sit with them, and then they will convene all of the district officials who would visit individual schools in the monthly meeting. They would look at the data together and they would discuss which ones are doing well, which ones are not. And that actually helped build capacity of the district as a unit. And then these district officers would then visit the schools, and they would have monthly meetings with the instructional leaders and in schools and the head teachers as well. So they had routines from there. As well, one other thing we did was there was an entity called the DSD at the time, which was the teaching and learning entity. So they also looked at the data and they used that to feed back into their teaching and learning interventions at school level, and how they train teachers and cohorts, and how their master trainers then cascade training back down to schools. So through that as well, data was used to inform some of their actions as well. And then separately, we had another chain of the delivery chain, which was more around the operations of the school. So the AEOs, they would visit schools monthly too. And data pertaining to their visits was shared with them, and then they would have a discussion with the head teachers too. So I guess it really boils down to your delivery chain and who's visiting the schools for what purpose, and then making sure data through those links is going back to the school and is being discussed with frontline officers and teachers. That's what I'd say to that.
Rahima,
Richard,
could I add one other point?
Please, Richard, do go ahead.
I think as well, comparative data can be really, really helpful, because sometimes schools say, well, we can't achieve well because we haven't enough money, because our children come from very poor backgrounds, and they will give reasons, sometimes excuses, for low performance. If you can show comparative data which shows that a school in exactly the same circumstances, with the same number of children, with the same budget, with the same number of children from poor backgrounds, actually achieves well, and you can say, well, actually look what they've done, why don't you talk to them about how they've achieved so well with the same amount of resources? So it can help to take away some excuses and help to encourage schools to look at where schools with the same resources have achieved very good success, whereas they haven't done quite as well. So it can encourage very good conversations and take some excuses away that schools sometimes use for poor performance.
Thanks, Richard. And I do have sort of a final question for you, Richard. So the data system in Punjab, which Hafsa has talked about, it's quite a complex data system, and there's a lot of infrastructure in place. Would you have any sort of advice to share with people who are working in systems where all of that infrastructure is not in place to get the data that they want to get?
Well, I think Hafsa's highlighted that you can use whatever technology you have, whether it be tablets or people on motorbikes, just or mobile phones or whatever. Be creative about the way in which you collect the data, bearing in mind the circumstances that you're in and the level of sophistication of the data collection system you have. Be inventive, be creative, look at where countries who have limited resources have managed to mobilize good data collections and learn from them.
Thanks, Richard. And thanks to both Richard and Hafsa for sharing their insights today. It's been a very good discussion. Thank you. So I'm going to move us towards the close of the presentation. We're almost to time. And I do want us to sort of pause and reflect on what has been some key takeaway for you from today's session, something new that you've learned, something that you're taking away after spending this time with us. So do go ahead and put that in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. I'll pause for a few seconds to let you do that. So I'm really glad to see somebody's put down, starting with a good enough plan. I'm really glad that that message has come across. So that's what we're aiming for, good enough, not perfect. So as you continue to put your responses in the chat, I want to talk quickly about the resources, which I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. So we do have an implementation playbook, which is available on the FLN Hub, and it takes you through all of the delivery elements that you saw right in the beginning in the sort of 15-element framework. And you'll see a lot of detail on delivery planning, on data systems, as well as some other things which we haven't had the time to talk about today. So that's a publicly available resource. So do check that out if you're interested in learning more about deliverology, and it shares some very interesting tools that you'll find useful in your work. And one other tool that we have up on the FLN Hub is the Capacity Builder. So what the Capacity Builder helps you do, it helps you assess the strength of your programs or interventions by asking you to answer a series of questions in a survey. And then it generates a heat map for you. You can see an example up on the screen. It'll tell you how well you're doing on each of the delivery elements and what you can do to do better on them. And it's also going to share sort of an action checklist with you, recommendations, and additional resources to help you. So it's a very interesting tool. I invite you all to register for the tool so that we can make that accessible to you, and you can use it hopefully with your teams to strengthen your implementation work. And so thank you everybody for joining us today. I think it's been a great session. I'm just going to check in the chat quickly. Anything else that people have put in? So there's a point on including risk mitigation in the implementation plan. Yeah, that was right at the bottom of the ranking. So I'm glad to see you're taking that away from the session. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to hand over to Sauchin to sort of send us off. And thank you from us. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank
so,
you.
Sauchin, back to you.
Thank you. A huge thank you to Richard, to Rahima, and to Hafsa for the very enriching session. And thank you to all the participants for your active engagement, for your interest, and for all your questions and comments in the chat. They've given us a lot to think about, and we're also hopeful that this presentation will give you some guidance and the resources and tools that you need to help improve the implementation of your FLN plans. So just a reminder that we have recorded this session, and so we'll make the recordings available to you. So the recordings will be available in English, French, and Spanish. And likewise, in terms of the slides, the presentation slides, we'll have them also in English, French, and Spanish. So be on the lookout for an email with these resources and the recordings in the next few days. And also another reminder that we have our next session of the Academy on teaching at the right level. And this will happen next Wednesday, February 9 at 7:30 Eastern Time. So thank you again to everyone. And we hope to see you soon. And please take good care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.